Hi everyone, this is Nick Pushak. I'm the Director of Standards for the LEDES organization, and I wanted to explain the LEDES 98BI file and show you how you can create one using Excel. Let's go to the LEDES website first. And on the LEDES website, you can download under LEDES Standards Data Exchange Formats, ebilling formats, the LEDES 98B format, BI format. Did a previous video of the LEDES 98B format. So we can first get the format specification, which is an Excel file, which we'll open up, and we can also take a look at a sample file, which displays on your screen. What I probably recommend is just copying here the file. So I'll do a Control-C, copy, and we will save the file to Notepad and then paste it in. So we have the LEDES 98B file, and as you can see, it's a little hard to read, so what we're going to do is import it into Excel. And so we will save this first, and we'll save this as LEDES 98BI-V2 sample. It's the second version of the BI format specification. And we'll also open up the specification document, which has all the field definitions. So we'll move this over to this side of the screen. And then what we can do is we can do a file open here, and we can locate that file. We need to choose all files here, and here's the file that we just downloaded or created. And what it's going to give us is a import wizard. We want to choose delimited, leave that choice there. Our data does have headers, so we want to click that. And then we want to check this and put in a vertical bar or pipe symbol here, which will make all of the data arrange properly. And then leave everything as general strings and finish our import. And now what we have is we have our specification, our LEDES 98B sample file here, which we'll review first. So the first line must contain this string. It's LEDES 98BI version 2, and each line in a LEDES 98 file must end with 2 square brackets, including the first line. Next line has all the field names, and what I like to do is if you click here in the top left and then double click on one of the dividers, the column dividers, you can widen all of the columns automatically to match the widest data in that column. So we see the column names on the second line, and then we have some data. Now let's go over field by field the different fields in the LEDES 98BI file. First, we have the invoice date. All dates must be a year, 4-digit year, 2-digit month, and then 2-digit day, with leading zeros on the month and day. And then we have the invoice number. Now notice a LEDES file, LEDES 98 file, can have multiple invoices. So the first 5 lines here make up one invoice, and then this last line here makes up a second invoice. Now most e-billing systems and corporations ask that you only submit one invoice per LEDES file. So you might not see this too often, but in the sample that we have on the LEDES organization website, we show an example where you could actually have multiple invoices in one LEDES file, but that's not too common. So we'll just focus on this set of fields here primarily. So this is the invoice number matching over here. Then we have the client ID and the matter ID for the law firm. So this is the law firm's client number for the client, the corporation typically, and the matter number at the law firm. Sometimes this client number has to match something within the e-billing system. So sometimes that's the tax ID of the corporation or some other number that must be used for the e-billing system. But a lot of times it can just be the law firm's client and then matter number for the matter the invoice is in regards to. Then the law firm assigned matter number, multiple matter IDs can be billed in the same invoice. So that's an important note there. Let me just move that over a little bit so we can see the full description there. And that's again, different billing systems and different clients might have a different opinion on whether you can bill against multiple matters in one invoice, but the specification does allow it. Next, we have the invoice amount. Again, notice this separate line here, which is a separate invoice, has a different invoice amount, but this is repeated, the invoice amount, which is the invoice total here for the total invoice. And there should be no commas or dollar signs in this data with up to 2 decimal places for your invoice total. Next, we have the billing start date and billing end date for the invoice. Again, that's year, month, day. Then we come to the invoice. Let's scroll over a little bit. The invoice description. Again, it's repeated. Notice many of these fields or data here are repeated for each line. So this first set of fields here is repeated. Then we come across the invoice line item number, and each line item in this file must have a unique line item number. It doesn't have to start at 1, but the convention is it usually does start at 1. It just has to be a unique number, integer number for each line number. Then we get, let's move our spreadsheet here. We have line number, and then we have whether it is a fee, whether the line is a fee item or an expense item. So these are the fees. First 3 are fee items, and then these 2 lines are expense items. You can also have invoice level fees or invoice level expenses with IE and IF. This is all described here in the expense fee item field. It's a 2-character field. Then we come to the item unit number or number of units. So for fees, this would be the number of hours billed with support for decimal support. For expenses, it would be the number of units of that expense type. So if it was copies, it would be the number of copies, things like that. This is typically in hours. That's defined here. Okay, for the units. Then we have it's a little confusing, but you typically would have units, and then you have the unit amount, but the unit amount is way over to the right, all the way over here. So again, for the first 3 items are fee items, so that's the hourly rate for the fees, and then this is the unit amount of the 2 expense items on the invoice. So I'm just jumping over there to sort of try to understand. These are the units, the unit amount, and then this is the adjustment amount if there's any line item adjustment on the entry. A negative value is a discount for line item adjustments. And then we have the line item total, which is simply the units times the unit amount plus any line item adjustment should equal the total. Again, these should not have dollar signs or commas, but can be up to 2 decimal places actually up to 4 decimal places in the specification, but obviously rounded to 2 when calculating a payment. This is the line item date, so it would be the date of the line item. And then for fees, the task is required for fee items. So we have the task and the activity code. Let's see, the activity is also required. So the UTBMS billing tasks and activities are required for fee items, and then the expense code is required for the expense items. Now those can be located on our LEDES website. You can find the activity codes here, the expense codes here. So here you can see the examples of some activity codes. And if we come back, we can look at the expense codes here. And then this jumps you over to the utbms.com website, which has a broader collection of codes. So again, the task and activity codes for fee items and the expense codes here for expense items. Moving on, we then, for the fee items, we want to identify the Timekeeper ID. And this is a unique number that the law firm assigns to each timekeeper. That number needs to be transmitted to the corporation, of course, with the timekeeper's name and timekeeper's classification. Now, with LEDES 98BI, really all the fields we've seen so far are matching the LEDES 98B file, but going over in regards to the timekeeper data, we have 2 fields here. We have the timekeeper last name and first name separated as 2 separate fields in the BI file, whereas in the original B file we just had the timekeeper's name, which would typically be first space last or last comma first. But coming back, this is the Timekeeper ID, which again the law firm is assigning. This is your line item description. Can be up to 15,000 characters. A lot of times it's a lot shorter than that, but this is your line item description for each line item. Again, these are the fee line items, and these are the 2 expense line items. This is the law firm ID, which will typically be the law firm's tax ID, but it could be some other ID. You just have to understand what the client or the corporation wants you to use as your law firm ID, and that's usually transmitted and agreed upon with the corporation. We talked about the unit number comes next. Then we have the Timekeeper ID, which we saw already, and the Timekeeper classification. If we look at the LEDES.org website, we can see the Timekeeper classifications listed here. So if we select that and then open up this link, you can see an example of the current Timekeeper classifications and the codes. You'd be using this first column code, and you have clearly associate, partner, I'm sure is in here, paralegal, various different timekeeper classifications. That would only be appropriate for the fee line items. Then we have one of the most important fields in the LEDES file, which is the client matter ID. So this is the corporation or the client, not the law firm's matter ID. It's the client's matter ID A lot of times this would be in a format of like year dash some type of sequential number, but whatever they've identified, however the corporation identifies the matter must be recorded here. And this is pretty important because the corporation is going to understand what matter you're billing against by this ID. Now, starting with column Y here, these are the new fields that the LEDES 98BI for international information have added. So first we have let's scroll down here. So here's the PO number. It's a purchase order number if a purchase order happens to be used, clearly optional. Client's tax ID. That would be we had the law firm's tax ID, and this would be the client's tax ID. And then we have the matter name, which should be, let's see what we state here, the name of the matter to which the invoice relates. This field is provided for the information only and must not be used by the receiving application as a primary key for the matter. So a lot of times that could be the law firm's matter name, which may not match the corporation's matter name. What's most important for the corporation to understand what matter it is the client matter ID. Okay, but this is the name of the matter. The invoice tax total would be the total tax on the invoice completely, and a big part of the additional fields, which we're going over now for BI, for international invoices, are tax fields, which we'll get into more and more. So this is the net total, which the net total basically is the total of the invoice plus the tax. So it's the line item total value, and this minus the invoice total tax. So that is the net total. The invoice currency is the ISO currency code for the currency being used on the invoice. We then have both the timekeeper's last name and timekeeper's first name as two separate fields. In the original LEDES 98B file, we just had one field for the timekeeper's name, and now this separates the first and last name. We have the account type, which is listed here, and it's either O for owner account or T for third party account. The law firm name and law firm address should be repeated here for each line. 2 lines of address, and then city, state, and zip or postal code for the law firm, and also the law firm country. We then have the client's name, typically the corporation's name, 2 lines of address, city, state, and zip and country. And then we have the tax rate for that line item. So notice that the fees are being taxed at 16%, and this would be the percent as a decimal. Let's just scroll down to show you that. And it can be, this actually is being changed as we speak to support many more digits for tax rates. It's currently 4 decimal places, and I think we're going to go to 10 decimal places for the line item tax rate. That's not officially out yet, but that's coming. Then we have the line item tax total, which would be typically the line item total times the tax. So let's see, to confirm that, it is the line item total. Line item total is the line item unit cost times the number of units plus any adjustments, and then which is the line item total, and then we multiply it by the tax rate to get the line item tax total. The tax type, a very important field which identifies the type of tax that this is, and the options are VAT, GST, PST, or other. We have the invoice reported tax total, which is the total tax on the invoice right here. And then last but not least, we have the currency of the tax. So both the currency of the tax and the currency of the invoice, which we saw back here, can be different, but we have two separate fields. So this is the invoice currency and the tax currency. So that makes up all of the fields in a LEDES 98 file. Also notice in the very last field, the data must end with a bracket because every line, even including the line of field names, must have the 2 square brackets to finish them up. So now that we've reviewed an invoice, let's create a new sample invoice. I'm going to get rid of this last line, and then we can use the fields that already exist here to make up our own invoice. So we'll say like 2018 09 28, which is today, will be the date of the invoice. Copy that down. Our invoice number will be 1234 5G, let's say. And our client number, let's just make up a client number, and it'll be 101. And our matter number for that client will be 1001. So these, again, are the law firm identifications for the client and the matter. Our total invoice, we'll just say, is $1,000. And you don't need the decimal places if it's 0. Our start date will be the month of August 2018. So 2018 August is 0801 for the start date. And the end date will be 2018 0831. And again, notice all of these fields are repeating here. For work done on the Acme matter will be our description for the invoice. We'll use sequential numbers. Let's say we have 5 lines of line items for this invoice. And we'll stay with 3 fee items and 2 expense items. But again, you could add additional lines here if you had multiple fees and or multiple expense items. Let's say we did 4 hours of work on the first line item, 5 hours on the second, and a half an hour on the third. And then we had 1 unit of expense for the first item and maybe 2 units for the second expense item. We will have, let's say, a $100 discount on the first fee item, no other discounts on the other items. Now our total should really be an equation, so we can say it equals the unit amount times the unit cost, and then plus any adjustment, which is the column here. So that's how we get to 1300. The line item unit costs, and these are the hourly rates for the 3 fee items. So let's say we charge $400 for the first attorney and $250 for the second attorney. And our attorneys are Bill Jones, and that attorney's billing on the first two fee items, and then the third fee item will be Jane Smith. And there we can keep these classifications, and we'll come back to that. But Bill Jones, the timekeeper's first and last names can be repeated over here. So Bill Jones for the first two line items, and Jane Smith. And by the way, this adjustment is on the unit amount, on the total. It's not an adjustment on the hourly rate. So the hourly rate, I think, was $400 an hour. We're not billing all 4 hours at $300 an hour. We're billing 4 hours at $400 an hour and then giving a $100 adjustment for that one line item. Now, the total of the invoice could be calculated here, or the invoice total. So that is now our invoice total, which we would want to place the value of that over here, because we had the invoice total right here. And I like using this paste special, where we can paste the value there, and that should be our invoice total. Now, actually, that may change if we change our expense items. So our expenses, we'll leave our expense items alone. This is the total that the two line items for expenses were these two amounts. We had, I think, 2 units of this and 1 unit of that. That's why the total, So 1 unit of that, 2 units of the last item, which was that. Out of town travel. I guess they traveled twice, for example. We'll change that. So the first one was 1 unit for the meals, and this would be FedEx charges or something. And we had 2 FedEx items, each at that same amount. Now, the expense codes, I don't know what are some valid expense codes, but these should be your expense codes and activity codes for those fee and line items. Again, let's maybe use 1001 and 1002 for our timekeepers. Bill Jones and Jane Smith. These would be the law firm identified IDs. Next, we want to put in the line item dates of service. So the first 3 items are for the fee items. So let's say this is 2018 August 4th for that line item, 2018 08 05 for the next line item, and this last fee item would be 2018 08. These are all August. And then these 2 items are for the fee expenses. So these expenses, let's say, happened on 2018 08 August 20th and 2018 08 21, the 21st of August. So then we have the UTMS task codes. Here are the activity codes for the fee items, and then the expense codes for the expense items. Those you just need to look up. I showed you where they can be found. We went over the timekeeper IDs already. Now the line item descriptions, sometimes they match the task and activity codes. Sometimes they're just free form. For fee items, they would be the line item detail about the description of the work done, and then these would be the types of expenses here. I'll just leave those there, that's fine. Then we come to the law firm tax ID. This should be the law firm's tax ID. So let's say it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We want to copy that down. That should be for every line the same. This was that unit cost, which we went over. These are the attorneys. You can put in an attorney or timekeeper for expense items if you'd like. You don't have to, but you can fill in. Whenever you fill in a timekeeper name here, you want to make sure you fill in the timekeeper ID on that line to match. So if you're going to use timekeepers here for your expense items, make sure you put your timekeeper IDs here. This is the corporation's matter number. So a lot of corporations would do something like maybe that could be their matter number. You'd have to ask the corporation, your client, for what matter number they use for the matter. This is a very important field. Then we have a purchase order. I'm pretty sure purchase orders are optional, and they are. So I'm going to just clear this out because I don't think we would have a purchase order. Client's tax ID. This is the law firm. Oh no, the corporation's tax ID, not the law firm's tax ID. So let's say that's 77 dash. Make up a number. This is the matter name, and let's say it's the Acme matter. This is the invoice tax total for the invoice, and we need to do some calculations on that. So if we look at the different fields, the sum of the line item tax totals, so we first have to get the line item tax totals. So, and the line item net total is the sum of all line item totals minus any total tax. So let's move over, and we'll say our currency is US dollar. And again, you can search for the ISO country codes, currency codes, and probably find on Google the various currency codes. These were the timekeeper names that we put in already, and our account type is all going to be for the owner own account. It's not a third party. We're not billing third party work. This is the law firm, law offices of Jack Jones, let's say. Copy that down. A lot of lines just have repeated data in it. It seems like a waste, but 1 Main Street. But you basically want to fill in the address, city, state, and postal code. This is the client's name, so we'll make that Acme Incorporated. And the address, I'm not going to update that, but this would simply be the address, and then we come to the tax rate. So let's say for this London law firm, we have a 10% tax, which would be represented as that for the fee items. And the line item total, which is going to be right here, is simply the unit cost times unit amount plus adjustments, which we did an equation, which is the line item total, then times that tax. So we can simply say this column equals the tax rate times, and if if we scroll all the way back to the line item total, right here, that should be the amount of tax for these different line items. Okay? And then we want to sum this up, and that's going to be our total tax on the invoice. So we'll copy that and go back to the invoice tax total, which is here. And again, I like using this paste value. Okay, so a lot of these lines aren't in a lot of these fields aren't in reference to the specific fee or expense item. It's really a overall value for the invoice. And then the net invoice net total, let's make sure we get this right, which is back here. The net total is the sum of all the line item totals in the invoice minus the invoice tax total. Okay, and the invoice tax total was the sum of the line item tax totals, which we just summed up. So our net invoice is the sum of, we could probably do it like this, the sum of the line item totals which is way back here. And then they said minus, oops, the tax. Actually, I think it's just this value. So we'll just, so copy that to that value and copy that value down. Okay. So again, the invoice net total is the sum of the line item totals in the invoice minus the invoice tax total. So I believe that is our LEDES 98 BI file. We have a invoice total here, which is the sum of all the line items right here. And then we had, which was 4228, and then we had at the very end here, we had these additional tax items. We had an additional tax of that amount that was then added. We didn't get to this last one, which is the this is the type of tax. We can leave that there. And then we have the invoice reported tax total, the amount of the tax in the national currency as reported to the tax authority. So this is the amount reported to the tax authority. I've got to believe that's going to be the same as our total invoice tax, which was right here. It's just the amount reported, which in most cases is probably the same. And then this is the invoice tax currency. Probably want to make our currencies all the same. So this would be the Great Britain pound, I believe. GBP. So we'll leave this currency GBP for the invoice. And that's the currency for the invoice, and for some reason we also have a currency for the tax which is there. So that is a LEDES 98 BI file, and I'm going to get rid of these little sum fields at the bottom. We have to get this file, this data, out into a text file, and there are a variety of ways. If we simply just save this file as a CSV or as a text file, okay, and we'll typically label this like invoice 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops. We will see that the file has tabs, and we have to replace all of these tabs with vertical bars. So the way you can do that is simply highlight one of the tabs, do Control-C or Edit Copy, and then put your cursor on the very first character, first line, and go to Replace, and then you can do Control-V here to paste that tab in, because you can't just put a tab in there, and then put in a vertical bar or pipe symbol and say Replace All. And you'll get some extra pipes on the first line. You also may get some extra lines with pipes. Make sure you don't have an extra blank line. So you see how my cursor's blinking there, so hit backspace, and then just double check that each line ends with a bracket, including that long line with the labels. And that is a legitimate LEDES 98B file. It should be a text file. And again, make sure this is on the first line, and we can save this, and we have a legitimate LEDES 98B file. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.